We've got a really fantastic panel with us today. The title is, as you know, what is green IT? How can you get interested in it? And what are the main obstacles there? So this is based on a white paper that we released. It's sort of the next step from a white paper that we released not too long ago, in which we explained that green IT is not just about coding. It's about looking at the holistic value chain of IT. So from data centers to hardware and then to software, it's a whole. You need to look at the whole picture, and it's definitely not just about which coding languages use less energy than others, because we're not even going to go there, because it's a big trap. But there are undebatable topics to green IT, which we're going to be talking about with that panel. Why are we talking about it today? Well, because firstly, global warming. It's the digital sector accounts for 4% of emissions, but it is going up very fast. So what can we do to reduce that? So we've been looking at lots of different examples in the white paper. Including we have one telco, and this was an example from the Green Software Foundation, which said there's a telco who made 30% energy savings simply by optimizing its code base. So that they used tools like SonarQube to do that. So you can save energy with green IT. That's the number one objective, but you can also save money. So we also have the example of Dalkia, which is part of EDF Group, which redesigned their website with eco design in mind, and their server needs for their website went from 7 to 2. So it's obviously good money savings too. So that's why we're organizing this panel, to talk about those sort of topics. It's going to be an open discussion with our experts, and so we're going to go we've got an hour. We're going to talk during that time, but we will leave time at the end to answer questions, to answer your questions. So you can ask them either in the chat or ideally in the questions section, which is at the bottom right of your screen. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce your speakers. And the first one I'd like to introduce is Anne Curry, who is the Director of Strategically Green and also a founding member of the Green Software Foundation. And you've just been working on something called a Green IT Maturity Ranking. Could you tell us a bit about that, and where do you think IT people are in general when it comes to green IT maturity?
Yes, so so one of the other things that I've been working on recently is I'm one of the co-authors of the new O'Reilly book, Building Green Software. And in line with the way that O'Reilly does things now, which I very much approve of, they push your chapters live on their site as soon as you've written them. So that means you can get feedback from people. And so the first few chapters were about code efficiency and operational efficiency and demand shifting and shaping, all that kind of stuff. And the most useful piece of feedback we had on it was, is there a maturity matrix for green tech? So something a bit like, I mean, there are lots of maturity matrix for performance and cryptocurrency, security and that kind of thing. And the idea of a maturity matrix is that it kind of defines what good looks like at the moment. So kind of, and it's usually a 1 to 5. So 1 is kind of like the very, very table stakes basics, and 5 is the top people who, you know, the actually where we're all heading for. So we decided that was a very good idea. So we've done one. We've collaborated with the Green Software Foundation. So it's now a Green Software Foundation project. So anyone can comment on it, and it's very early stages. But we've developed it. We developed 5 levels of how far you are in terms of green tech adoption. One is like somebody in your organization cares, a couple of people care, but there isn't really any organizational awareness of it. And to be perfectly honest, that is where almost everybody is at the moment. Even if your CEO cares about it, if only a few people care and there isn't really any organized there aren't any organized processes, you're still at level 1, and that is where we all are, unfortunately. Level 2 is a big step up. You know your scope 1 and 2 emissions, and you are starting to work on things that you don't need a great deal of data for. So things like shutting down unused machines, that kind of thing. And as James says, not unheard of for that to save you 60%, 70% of your energy use. You don't actually need any data to make massive steps forward. And in the old days, level 2 would have been, you would have just offset, and that would have been carbon neutral. And obviously carbon neutral is nowhere near where we need to be. 10 years ago, it was great. Now it's not. Now it's only level 2 of level 5, of 5 levels. Level 3 is, you know, all your scope 1, 2, and 3. And you're working more effectively. Level 4, you're starting to get into dynamic data and real-time data about your use. And level 5, you're on 24/7 CFE, and you're done basically. So we're very keen to get people to, and there's a preliminary version available on my LinkedIn at the moment that you can put feedback on. But that will be part of the Green Software Foundation, so everybody can have a say.
Great. So that's a good place to start, with Anne saying that we're very much it's very much early days in terms of people really getting to grips with green IT. Carsten, you work for Plan A, which is one of the best known carbon accountants in Europe, and a very sort of well-known sustainability startup. What would you could you first introduce yourself, please? And tell us what your involvement with green IT is.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Carsten. I'm the principal backend engineer at Plan A. Obviously, I'm a developer there, and this is why I'm here to talk also about the developer side of things. Of course, I can talk a bit about Plan A, the business model, but my most interest lies in how can we make green IT from the inside, let's say.
Okay. And is that something that you hear a lot about from your clients, or is it, like we were saying, it's just sort of bubbling up now? It's all quite new. The green IT aspect.
It's both. I mean, we do have clients. It really depends on the clients which we have, right? We do have several industries. So there are clients, I would say, I don't know, fashion industry, for example. They produce a lot of articles. So there the IT-related emissions, I don't know really the business model there, but I think they are quite low in comparison to the emissions caused by the production of goods. Then we also have IT companies who, of course, they are really interested in that, because for them, it's the majority of emissions obviously comes from IT. And this is there, of course, where we get more and more requests on that topic. And there we, of course, try to help. This is why we're here, right?
Okay, cool. So we'll come back to Plan A. Romane, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So I'm co-founder of Ctrl S. It's the shortcut for saving on your keyboard, which is a design and innovation French studio. So we've been working exclusively on the green IT subject for the last 3 years. Our team is like a mix between engineers, social scientists, and designers. So we are not tackling the subject only through the technical prism of the subject.
Okay, so it's like a broader.
Yeah, we're really trying to have like a wide view on that subject. And I would say that in France, at least, green IT is still a very new subject. It hasn't affected all businesses, and yet it's already a bit obsolete because it's progressing quickly, but not necessarily in the right direction, in my opinion. because the subject is still seen as only technical and the actions are mostly measuring, optimizing the existing and compensating, which is a direction we don't really approve of. We think that what we call in French techno-solutionism, which is like, I think the translation is techno-solutionism, which is putting deep tech everywhere and only trying to solve problem with it, is definitely an environmental issue. And it urgently requires a very different solution, like really a larger vision. And we're trying to bring that.
Yeah, it's President Macron is often associated with the techno-solutionism. It's this idea that you can just wave a magic wand. Apple has been a bit guilty of that recently as well, saying their products are carbon neutral, whereas in fact they should probably start by trying to get us to buy less of their products, because that's where the main impact is. But yeah, that's already interesting. We'll come on to that too. Simon, so you work for Scaleway, like me. What's your particular interest in green IT?
Well, my background is in distributed systems, performance engineering, that kind of stuff. And I run the serverless compute team at Scaleway. Like a lot of people, I guess I have a mix of fear and depression when I think about the climate crisis. But as is the case with lots of people, if you can turn your job to having a more positive impact, that's quite a big lever that you can lean on. And so for me, I see quite a lot of places where green IT doesn't necessarily have to be green IT on its own. It can improve performance, it can reduce cost, it can improve efficiency. Those cost savings will eventually be passed on to your users as well. And so if you can find those win-win places, it shouldn't be too hard. And ironically, a lot of people will be doing green IT without even realizing it. If they're doing FinOps to just reduce their costs, indirectly they're reducing their footprint. I do agree with what Romane said, that it's not just about optimizing your current thing you're doing. There's probably slightly awkward questions around, should you even do it in the first place? There's a lot of this conversation gets very dangerously political very quickly. So I'll just say
before that happens, Simon.
Before that happens, I'll stop myself.
Tell us what you've done at Scaleway you've been working on something at Scaleway to
So to that point, part of my remit as someone who runs a big piece of infrastructure is I need to reduce costs and I need to improve performance, and I see that as a really big win-win. And so I started monitoring the environmental impact of all our serverless infrastructure as well. And that's kind of led to me building more and more systems for measuring stuff internally. And it's been a really interesting exercise. I think quite a few of us internally are interested in it. And the next step is obviously building that into something bigger. And like Anne says, we're at level 1, I would say, in that regard. Which is a shame, but it's a start.
So we've seen, it's a start. We've seen so OVH, the other French cloud provider, has just released their carbon calculator. So that's really interesting to see. And then the big 3 cloud providers, they all have their own ways of working out this impact. But what we've seen is a big challenge with Simon is that doing it in the most accurate way and doing it along the lines of the greenhouse gas protocol is a massive challenge, notably because the further you go into the detail, the longer it takes, and you might not get something out for another 3 years. I suppose that's Carsten, I'd say that's maybe a challenge for Plan A also with your reporting activities. What's the right level of detail to go into when you're measuring all of this?
That's a very hard question because I think the right level. I mean, when we, for example, we talk about AWS, these reports which we get there, I think they are not very accurate, at least what I've heard. But we also don't get very sufficient numbers from them. So I don't think we have a real standard or a real level on to agree what exactly for emissions to calculate here. But I think it's still good to do it, because otherwise, let's start with something, right? The whole market is, I think, evolving very quickly. I just was just recently on a conference where I spoke to some people from a platform as a service provider, and they started also to implement carbon intensity transparency in their product. So I think we're going there, but still it's not very accurate. A lot of things are spend based. Let's say we use, for example, also the cloud carbon footprint tool, which is, I think, really cool. But still, it's also more or less based on usage, billing, etc. But it's a good start. You have something to measure. I mean, I still think we should measure and optimize. I don't think we should not do it, because otherwise I can just stop my job and leave it be. So these tools are coming, and I think it's important that we request it from the providers, especially looking at Simon and you, James. I know you're working on that, and that's great, but we need to request it also from other companies, especially when it comes to reporting, right? I mean, this CSRD, which is upcoming, you need to ask basically the questions to your software providers you buy the software from. Look, what's the emissions of actually my software here? And this already will hopefully help a lot, because then it bubbles up from the sales to management eventually. Hopefully, that's what I would say about that.
Yeah,
okay.
It's a really good definition of kind of what is green IT and what's a green. But we all need to be adopting green platforms, and part of that is they have to tell you stuff. They have to give you your. I mean, as you say, as French Voltaire would have said, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of good." Any data is better than no data, but we've got to start somewhere.
Absolutely.
I also think there is a level of anger to be had on the part of the users in feeling like cloud providers are pushing the problem onto them. If I tell you how much you're using, that's me just telling you how much you're using. I'm making no effort to actually make it greener on my side either. So I think there should be a level of anger, as there is with other companies, pushing the problem onto users or consumers. That gets missed quite often in this discussion. It's not just cloud providers, it's providers of all kinds of tech.
But they do also have a point, don't they, in that if you just lift and shift into the cloud, then really there's not much they can do about optimizing it. The win for cloud is multi-tenancy, and the obvious, with the extreme example being serverless. There's so much more you can get in terms of efficiency out of that. But people have to use it. If they don't use it, and it is work to adopt these managed services, then you can't really help them that much. They have to help themselves as well.
That's serverless is Simon's specialist subject, so I'm sure we'll come back to that. I just wanted to stick with Carsten for a minute to talk about. We were talking about green IT maturity. Carsten, you're a developer. You work with developers. How conscious do you think developers are of the impact they can have in their choices of cloud providers, applications, how they code? Similarly to the questions around how do you think it's something they think about every day, or is it still too soon?
Well, yeah. So I think it's I try to speak a lot on conferences and write articles about this topic. So I'm getting a lot of feedback, and usually the feedback is, "Oh, I didn't consider this really. I have not seen it that way. So I think the awareness is just not there. We developers, we have our neat laptops, right? My cool device. There's no emissions from it. You don't hear the noise unless maybe you have a very old one with a loud fan. You don't see any smoke coming out of it. So you don't see the emissions you cause. That's what I mean, right? And I think if we would have that, then it would be more obvious. But we developers, we are super clean. Sit in a hip cafe and then doing our work. It's very clean, but most of them are not aware. And every time when I tell the number, the 4%, or I tell this more, because 4% is always a bit like, okay, 4%, what's that? But when you say 1.4 billion tons, metric tons per year, that's a different level, right? And then usually people come and realize, oh, there's something we can do about it. And But we have to keep talking about it. It's really important that everybody keeps talking about it. And I encourage every developer to speak up in their company. I think many would be surprised how many like-minded people are there in the company as well. Mm-hmm. And that's what can form some movement in the end. So yeah, Great. We're not so aware, but hopefully it gets better.
And there's also, I often hear there are different ways of coming at the question. If you say to them, you should do this to be greener, that might not work. But if you say to them, if you do this to be more efficient, then it might work, right?
I would say one of the things that we're pushing in the book is that we've got to align, firstly, people care about developer productivity. Then it's like overwhelmingly developer productivity. So it's got to be green, also has to be productive, scalable, cost-effective, and secure, and resilient. And usually, if you can't, and there are ways of aligning all of those things, but if you push against it, then you won't get very many people to adopt it. The 4% is, yeah, I know what you mean, Carsten, about saying 4% doesn't sound like very much, but everybody's like 4%. So if everybody doesn't fix their 4%, then we're screwed. Plus, also, the 4% is just data centers. So if you start to, the last Greenpeace number I saw about this it's more like 10, 12 more if you start to include the embodied carbon in devices. So we need to make devices last a lot longer, which is where Romane comes in.
It's 4%, 12%, whatever happens, it's growing super fast, and 4% is double planes. So 4% doesn't sound like much, but it is huge.
And it's not entirely. When I say 4%, the electronic devices is where Romane comes in. It's not only about the hardware. And so many, I throw away my devices because I run out of security patches, or it's software decisions that are causing devices to be thrown away, or secure and not, or insecure and not thrown away, which is also bad.
Great. So that's something that Romane, you're working with on you're helping the Paris 2024 Olympics team with their green IT strategy, and there's something to do with helping them to use their computers better. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that's one of the clients we have. We've been working on it for the past 2 years. Mm-hmm. So the first part of our mission was to build the whole green IT strategy, working with multiple business units, redacting a complete document with quick wins, what they can do, what impact it would have, how difficult it would be for them to implement that. So that was a big part of the mission. And what we really try to do with that is that working with not only with engineers and the IT departments, because it's still like in the minds of people that only engineers in the IT department can deal with green IT. But in fact, it's all about strategy in the first place, specifications, IT architecture, UX, UI a lot, content, front end, back end, hosting, digital communication. So basically, all of these are fields of actions. And today, everything is digital. It's everywhere. It's everyone's responsibility within an organization to have a better use, but mostly a better product design when there is a product or service design through the whole process. So that's really what we've been trying to plant a seed in their minds about that. And the second part of the mission with the Olympics is to raise awareness towards their 1,000 employees on that subject. So we are building a whole week of actions, including debates, repair division, recycling division, because we are obviously focusing on the material. And it's nice sometimes to also work on the individual level within organizations, given that we've worked with them on major green IT action before. It's okay to work also on that little actions. But just to
go ahead.
To say something about what Simon said earlier, I think it's key in our debate about the political dimension of green IT. To my mind, if it's not hard, if it's not perceived as difficult, if making choice is easy, it's not enough for the environmental challenge we are facing. And so it has to be political, even in organizations, and that word can be scary for a lot of them, but we have to find a way to have debates about like this wider vision, this larger vision of do we even need that product or that service? And I think it's going to be key for the debate.
Yeah, it's a massive topic. But how far should it go? If it is political, should it go as far as government saying you can only buy one smartphone every 3 years? Does that? I know that's never going to happen, but is that how far you think we should go?
I mean, political is not just about the government or the legal arsenal that they can deploy to help us. I think it's going to happen, but that's more of my personal view. And I think that hard law is going to be like key for the environmental challenge, but that's another debate. But what I've seen in organization, and I've seen a question in the chat asking about how else to place green IT as a holistic approach within organization than by showing positive business cases and showing that we are reducing costs. I think that we can also show what it will do if we don't do anything. So having a more negative view, I think it can be really efficient. And we built a workshop that is called Projection 2050, which is basically design fiction. And we're trying to really project what is going to happen if we keep like doing the business as usual as we are already doing, or just making little changes like optimizing the existing, or find like always a more specific way of measuring. So we're really trying to see what is going to happen in 2050, and we have different scenarios. That's quite a cool interactive workshop we built, and it's a bit negative. People are going out feeling bad, but I think it can really help within organization, not only showing positive business cases, but also what can happen if we don't do it.
You've got to underline the contradictions, right? You were saying that you're working on the Olympics green IT strategy, but you've also got sponsors of the Olympics who are giving away gadgets and just
smartphones,
to
every
all
athlete.
Athletes. We won't name the company, but it's constantly conflicting stuff.
Exactly.
And it's like you were saying, and this is why you founded Strategically Green, which is to distinguish what merely feels green and what's really strategic. How do you sort of push your clients away from greenwashing and into really effective green IT solutions?
Well, I mean, so the first thing is I've been talking on kind of ethics and that kind of thing, and giving conferences and all that kind of stuff on the green stuff. It really doesn't land. The best way to get people to really sit up and listen is actually the EU is doing an amazing job at the moment with their carbon border import tax. And they've said that's going to be everything, including services. So, and you marry that up with dynamic pricing on electricity, which again the EU countries are leading on. in the end, it's going to be very, very expensive to run on-demand systems, and you are going to pay a hefty tax if you want to have any customers in the EU. And the EU are a huge base of customers. So if you don't do it, and you are, you know, business-wise, you're crazy not to do it, because there's one thing from rising out this maturity matrix, and we're all at level 1. There's a lot of work to get to level 4 or level 5, which is where we're going to need to be if you want to still, in 10 years' time, it's going to take you 10 years to get there. And you're only going to realistically going to be able to import into the EU if you're there at that point. It is the GDPR of green. If you want to keep having the wealthiest customers in the world, you're going to have to do this. And it's a load of work. The good thing is it is totally aligned with, you will have a much healthier business at the end of this. You'll have resilience, and you'll have cost cutting, and you'll have effective use of the cloud, and you'll have scale. So it's not a downside, but if you don't do it, the threat is not just that the world will burn down, because individual action is very hard to relate that back to that. As James, you said yourself, it's just frustrating because other people are doing different things. It's hard to relate individual action to saving the world, but your business will not survive if you don't get with the program. Green is just completely aligned with good practices, good operational practices, good coding practices, CI/CD, SREs, error budgets. If you want to survive, the future is green.
So where should my, imagine I've got a company, an imaginary company that is nowhere, has done nothing. Where should I start? Massive question, I know, but.
Well, no, actually, the interesting thing is that there's the biggest wins to be made. You know, it's like you don't even need huge amounts of data. So VMware cut their carbon for one of their major data centers in Singapore. They were moving it. So while they were doing it, we thought, well, we'll just make sure what we're moving makes sense. You know, are those services still operational? It turns out 66% of their services of their machines were on, but not doing anything material to the business anymore. These services. So there you had a 66% reduction in carbon, save money. Those were all the security hole, because you can't have machines sitting around with nothing, not being watched, and just knowing what you're doing. The first thing you should do is a scan, as a zombie service scan, as Holly Cummins of Red Hat puts it.
Quantify.
Find out what you've got, find out what your machines are doing, and turn off the ones that are not doing anything. That is your first step, and it's good for your business generally. It's not just good for the planet.
We've got a question in the chat that I was wondering about too. Could you rewind to the EU tax you were talking about, and maybe explain it a bit more? What's it called and what does it imply?
Well, I'm not an expert on this. Carsten, this must be something that is coming up for you. And I can't remember what it's called. The carbon border adjustment. Is it carbon border adjustment?
Unfortunately, I'm also no expert on this. I'm just a poor developer.
Let me look. I'm gonna look it up whilst.
It's the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So, so it sounds like I know almost nothing about it, but it sounds like I did read about it only the other day because I was talking about it with a group of people. So this is a whole thing where it's rolling out next year for some industries. Coal, steel, electricity, that kind of thing. And the idea is it's to level the playing field. So the EU already has quite strict rules on not, compared to the rest of the world, on carbon emissions. And they want to make sure that that the EU businesses are not competing with businesses that are undercutting based on using dirty fuel and dirty practices and all that kind of stuff. So the first thing they're going to do is get people to measure their effective carbon emissions, and they're going to demand that if they want to import those kinds of goods. And then within a couple of years' time, they'll have to pay an import tariff to match up with the work that folk in the EU are doing. And the plan is that this will extend to basically everything that's imported into the EU, including goods, including services. So including so if you're in the same way the GDPR, it doesn't matter if you're hosting your data outside the EU, you still have to comply if it's for EU citizens. If you're selling to EU citizens, your services still have to be subject to carbon measurement and subject to carbon taxes. So and that is coming, and it's going to take us a long time. It's much harder than the GDPR to do this because, as we say, everybody's at level 1. So we need to get there. It's going to take us quite a long time. So we really need to get cracking.
Yeah, the article, we may have read the same article the other day. I remember it was an American article, and it was basically saying, wow, this is going to be huge. But yeah, it did seem to be very more focused on steel and sort of...
For now, but they've said within the next 9 years, it sounds like they want it to be everything. It's going to take us quite a long time to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's what we think, Anchor, is it's going to be applicable from next year, but we can check up on that afterwards. Let's try and focus a bit more on concrete examples. Carsten Plan A has a client we were talking about in a how do I put this, environmentally debatable sector which is NFTs. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how you managed to reduce their impact?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So this company was selling NFTs like gaming cards.
It's called So Rare, right?
Yeah,
It's
I wasn't sure if I could
crunch.
say the name, but okay. So we of course they approached us and said, how can we lower the emissions? And the first thing was obviously here to have a look, to measure something, even though if the numbers might not be so correct. They're coming back to this argument of having the correct numbers. So then it quickly turned out that these NFT were generated with blockchain, right? This proof of work, this old concept, this super heavy, computational heavy concept, which is mind-blowingly energy guzzling when like more than the Netherlands already. So they changed it to use Ether, which works with the proof of stake, which is a different approach where this is not so the computational intensive. So they were easily, just by switching this very easily, by being aware of it and then taking action on it, they were able to reduce their carbon footprint by 99% on this particular product. So this I think is very impressive, that also you can already start and do a lot without having the best setup of measuring at hand. Just go for it. Start somewhere and have a look everywhere. Look for the typical. I hope the managers will approve the low-hanging fruits. Right there, you can go and do already quite something. And then I think it also raises awareness inside of the company when you have these kind of cases, and then you spread them amongst the company. Then this will hopefully also like raise awareness in others, and then they will, oh, we have maybe some similar thing going on, like the zombie examples you said. This is also a really mind-blowing example, 66% machines just running without nothing. So yeah, this I think is a very, very nice example indeed. Yeah.
So it's like Anne was saying, it's often the first steps that can be the most impactful.
There's an interesting point about accuracy here, where if you're talking about a percentage reduction in something, it doesn't matter how inaccurate the numbers are. A 50% reduction is still a 50% reduction. So as long as you know it's a linear scale, which you can pretty much guarantee, one server is half as bad as two, we can forget the accuracy question for a while if we're talking about reductions like that.
So just exactly talking about the measurement aspect, that's what you've been getting your hands dirty with recently, Simon. What were some of the surprises and difficulties you encountered when you set about trying to measure the impact of Scaleway's cloud products?
One of the things that I realized, so there's a French agency, ADEME, who have released this proposed methodology for calculating your kind of full life cycle impact.
PCR cloud.
Yeah. Even reading that, I was thinking, we don't know a bunch of these inputs. And I think the scale of the task, even from a cloud provider, is mind-boggling, because ultimately for the hardware, for the manufacture part of the impact, we're still consumers. And hardware manufacturers give us some pretty high-level numbers about each server. But then if we really want to go all the way down the supply chain to the source of the hardware, then it's impossible, even for us as large consumers of it. So that was quite daunting to see. But forgetting the accuracy point, I was actually quite surprised at how easy it is to reduce cloud infrastructure to basically just servers in a room. As long as you can measure the impact of one server in a room somewhere, you can scale that up to any cloud resource. You just say, oh, this cloud resource takes 5% of this thing for 10% of the time. And once you've got that primitive of measuring a server, you can do almost all cloud services. And so I think it's quite a nice technical problem. It's really fun as well to work on. Like I would say green IT is, you learn a lot about, well, you have to know a lot about performance and measurement. One of the final things that I found difficult was I got a number out for our serverless infrastructure for a month. And I had to say, is that good or is that bad? And it's really hard. You've got tens of kilos of carbon of CO2 equivalent. And you say, well, I know this number won't be zero because we're doing something. We will consume, we will have an environmental impact. And obviously making it smaller is always better. But as a business who's growing, you have to kind of get this sense for what is a reasonable number. And I found that very, very difficult.
It's because it's comparing apples with pears. You put a sort of this is the equivalent of however many flights from Paris to New York.
But that's really that's a difficult. I mean, what does that mean as well? You know, I mean, it's very individual action. It is. I don't know if anybody's read Michael Mann's The Climate War, but it's really very good about how much we've been distracted away from the bigger ticket items to things like, you know, are you a vegan? Well, in that case, stop talking. It's kind of like we've been diverted away from really major things that the world needs to do by we can't even start talking about it until we've tackled individual action, and it's a ploy to distract us from big changes. Yeah.
So, okay, noting that down, the climate war for afterwards. Can you tell us we were talking before about some of your favorite examples in terms of green IT practices. You mentioned you were talking about Skyscanner, for example.
Yes. So Skyscanner, there are various other companies that have done amazingly good work at reducing their carbon bills, but that wasn't, although they all care about, I mean, everybody cares about it and wants to do better, but often where they make the biggest, where they have the biggest impact is where they were doing something else that happened to be very green. It was more kind of just modern good practice. So Simon mentioned FinOps as being a really, you know, spend less money. It's a pretty good rule of thumb. You're burning less carbon. Skyscanner were an interesting case because what they actually wanted to do is make their systems more resilient. So along the principles of chaos engineering. And so they used spot instances on AWS to do that. They moved most of their infrastructure over to spot instances because it has that kind of chaos engineering. You're forced to make everything very resilient because the platform can disappear underneath you at any time. But
sorry, Anne, what's the difference between spot instances and normal instances?
So a spot instance is an instance where there are no SLAs on it at all. Basically, you say, here's a job, run it whenever you like, just come back to me when it's done. So 0 SLAs. So hard to architect on top of, but actually there are some people putting their entire systems over to spot instances. And what they do for a cloud provider is they allow the cloud provider to get really, really high machine utilization. because they go, oh, there's a machine quiet, I'll stick a spot instance on that. And that means that they're really low carbon because they're making sure that the machine utilization is really good. They're very efficient. So usually they cut your hosting costs by about 90%, but they also cut your carbon emissions similarly. And they also, the thing that I like about them, and they're not being used for this particularly at the moment, but they will be in the future. Google are already talking about wanting to use them for this. Using them for time shifting for 24/7 CFE. So if you want to run on 24/7 carbon-free energy, sometimes you're going to need to time shift jobs so that they're running when the sun's shining, not when it's dark and the wind's not blowing. And things like spot instances, because there's no SLA, are really good for that. Even if you only move by 5 minutes, you can have a very significant impact on whether or not you're running against green electricity or not. So spot instances are my personal thing that I like everybody to be thinking about using.
They sound a bit less reliable though.
They are. So you have to, so chaos engineering is the concept where you can make systems more reliable by building on top of an unreliable platform, a bit like the way the internet isn't very reliable, and as a result we've got really quite reliable systems running on top of it, because you kind of get used to the fact that sometimes it's okay, right, I can't rely on that happening within 5 minutes, so I have to use distributed systems, asynchronousness, make my systems cleverly less latency sensitive, and all of that stuff is required for the energy transition because it's required for demand shifting and shaping. So I like spot instances because they exemplify the kind of architectures we're going to need to move towards.
Great.
But Simon probably has some thoughts on that.
I do. So time shifting is one of those things that is not necessarily a win-win when it comes to green IT. It's, unless providers offer you a real cut price, you as a developer going to your manager saying, our batch jobs are going to run at a random time. They might say, but why? You know, is that a big problem? And I really like the sell of spot instances reducing cost, because that's a no-brainer for the right job. But when it comes to other things where you don't get so much of a win-win, I'm less confident that it will be adopted so widely, because it's a harder sell to the business.
It's hard.
Sorry, to be clear to people, that time shifting, people who don't know what time shifting is, it's running your compute workloads at times when the carbon intensity in the electric grid is lowest. Sorry, I just had to butt in there.
And it's a totally key. So demand shift. Sometimes it's called demand shifting or demand shaping, and it's really quite key to the energy transition, because it's going to be very, very expensive to have always on renewable power. You know, you got to have batteries, and then that's a huge amount of work. And you know, you got to have nuclear, but renewables are where we're going, and it's where we're getting all the wins. But they are innately, unless you start to put batteries in, they are variable in their availability. So we've designed everything up to now to be very on demand, because that's what fossil fuels provide us with, on demand power. But in the future, we're going to have to think about things in a different way that are less on demand. And so as you say, it's a lot of work to do that, but it does get you resilience at the end, and it does make it future-proof.
There's a really good example in our white paper from Microsoft about using Kubernetes to run workloads only when the carbon intensity is lowest, and it apparently it's not that difficult to put in place. So there's an idea.
It has to go hand in hand with with hardware changes as well, because otherwise, if your machines are only used half the time, then that's a bit of a problem as well. But if machines can be made to last twice as long, then that will offset that. But it goes hand in hand with machine longevity.
Great. We're running out of time. Unless Carsten or Roman have anything they really want to say about what we just said, I'm going to move on to the questions.
Yeah, just a little thing about like how we try to have this wider vision. For example, on the blockchain thing. So when we're saying 99% less by switching from proof of work to proof of stake, we're trying to ask the question, okay, but what is it still representing? And actually it's still representing, last time I checked, approximately 44 Visa transaction. One transaction proof of stake is still like a lot. So we have to see the progression, like the percentage less we are doing, but we have also to see like what it's still representing. And also like switching from proof of work to proof of stake, what are all the miners that we're mining with proof of work, with huge computers, huge processing? What are they doing with their computers now? Are the pool closing? Are they like focusing on other blockchains now because they have to make the money out of the machines they have? So it's a lot of question around the thing that we're trying to ask when working with cryptocurrency, for example, or blockchain clients. We're really trying to see the big picture in that. So that's important to mention.
Agreed. I think a lot of them have probably pivoted to AI now, but we're not going to go. We're not here to talk about crypto or AI. We do have some really super. We have some great questions that are being asked by the audience. So I'm going to go through them by the most popular questions. So the first one is from Anka, who is asking. So we're talking about. Anne, you talked about level 1 of maturity, but how do we get up to level 2? Anka is saying that if we're only showing positive business cases, that's not enough. We need to show that we're reducing costs as well. So Anne, how would you say we can go beyond level 1 of?
Well, I mean, level 1 to level 2 is basically cost reduction. It's so level 2 is, and also getting yourself ready for the carbon border adjustment mechanism, because otherwise you are really going to be in trouble later on when you don't have that data available to you. So level 1 to level 2 is on the one side, on the reporting side, you need to be putting pressure on all your suppliers and everybody else to give you scope 1 and scope 2 emission data. You need to know what's going on. Even it doesn't matter if it's even annual. It's start annual, then move to monthly, then move to weekly. But that's, on the one hand, it's getting more data, quite broad data, get you 1 and 2s, and on the other side, start doing your FinOps stuff. So turn off your machines that aren't in use. Start doing basic kind of manual audits. Start thinking about, you don't have to immediately at this point, but what's your multi-tenancy strategy? Are you running in a system where you've got multi-tenancy? Because that massively increases your server utilization, which it reduces your electricity use, and it also reduces your embodied carbon as well, because maybe you're only using 1 machine when 2 would previously have been used. So I mean, this is a Scaleway stuff. Moving into the cloud is usually quite a good move for this kind of thing, because they do multi-tenancy very well. So yeah, first move. And the good news, I mean, it's terrible to be at level 1, but we all are. But the good news is all the wins, all the quick wins are immediately in front of you. The quickest wins are from level 1 to level 2. So the good news is it's a horrible place to start, but it's also a good place to start.
Great, thanks, Anne. The next question we have is from Olivier. He says most tech companies think that their scope 3 is not their problem. How can they be forced to address their software and infrastructure emissions? This is one for Carsten, I think.
Yeah, forcing. I don't know, but I think we have this issue of also again some laws upcoming. What was it called? The
carbon border adjustment.
No, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive.
CSRD, yeah.
So this is, I think this is again if this wouldn't happen on a political level, then it would probably be much harder. But for this case, I think it's something you have to do anyway. So what I also meant before, we have to request it from the supply chain. We have to. It's unfortunately then hits the first end, let's say, in the supply chain the most probably, but we have to start there somewhere. So, but I'm not sure if we can really force it. I think it will, at least from a business perspective, they have to do it at some point. They should rather start with it because, as I read about this CSRD, it will be quite big. And first of all, of course, big companies will be affected, but then it will also go to smaller and smaller companies. So better be prepared now. Otherwise, it will hit you hard. I'm not sure if this really answers the question, but
yeah. Well, the CSRD, if anyone doesn't know, is the European non-financial reporting directive, which comes into effect from 2024. And what we hope is that it will push people to report all of their scopes the same way. Currently, effectively, we're seeing some of the biggest companies who are reporting scope 3 however they see fit, and it needs to be comparable to make sense. So I think what we're saying is that we need to all be speaking the same language when it comes to reporting, and if that's greenhouse gas protocol for now, if it's CSRD later, we are going in the right direction if we're not there yet.
Olivier makes a very good point in the chat that all the regulation so far is about measuring and reporting.
Yeah.
There's nothing about reducing. And really crucially, there's nothing about accuracy in there either. You can report a number and it could be total nonsense, but you're still complying with the regulation. So it's a bit toothless in that regard, but you have to start with measuring before reducing. So you've got to cross your fingers and hope that it doesn't stop there. Otherwise,
I think it won't stop there. I don't think it'll stop there.
There's another question from Olivier, but to be fair, I'm going to ask one we have from someone else, from Jake. His question is, what do you think about private companies that are creating commercial products from public data sets and open source tooling on software sustainability? Is there value optimizing these systems, or are they just taking advantage of others' work and monetizing it?
I think it's absolutely fine. Everything out there helps. Everything out there. I have no problem with people if people that don't make money out of going green, then they won't go green fast enough.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's a perennial problem of open source software as well. This isn't limited to green IT.
It's not just green. Yeah. True.
We're not doing it out of the goodness of our hearts. We're doing it because it's necessary. We have to do it. We have to, it's not about fuzzies. It's not about doing the right thing or, being a nice person. It's necessary, and we need to turn everything towards making it happen.
Well, I would say one thing about the private companies. So for a cloud provider, for example, we can't put all of our data in the public domain. So therefore, there's a really good project, a Boa Vista project called Energist, which allows private companies, cloud providers, to anonymously submit metrics from their servers. And that's a really nice example of private companies making money out of sustainability, but also giving back to help others.
Yeah. And also reminds me of one of Scaleway's clients told me recently, we're not just interested in sustainability for its own sake, was because, well, if we don't have a planet, then we can't do business. I mean, sounds obvious, but there you go. So we've gone 1 minute over time, but we do have just one more question from Olivier. It says, most of the time tech teams are working in silos, whereas green IT practices are focused on UI or UX or software development or infrastructure, but how can they all articulate that together? Maybe that's one for Romane, in terms of the broad.
Well, I'm happy to learn that they focus on UI or UX in green IT practices, because to my mind they are not yet a lot doing that. But
so how do you encourage people to work better together across IT teams?
well, a good project manager, a good product owner. I don't know. I think it's all about like who's leading the project, why is the project in place, and if the people here are really convinced, or if they're doing that just to tick a box and say, okay, we're doing green IT, I just optimized 3 lines of code. So I think it's really about culture more than the technical solution for that. But yeah, I'm not quite sure. Without seeing exactly why it's not well articulated and without auditing the product or the service, it's hard to say. But yeah, I would say that it's more human than technical.
Agreed. Anne?
And I do have an ask on it, a wish on this, which is that if people are moving towards having platform teams, then the platform is the place to be pushing the green stuff, because it's so much operational. The big wins are so much operational. If you can get your platform team to buy into this and involved in this and make it part of their measurement and their metric and what they're held accountable for in the long run, I think you'll find the biggest win is in the platform.
Fantastic. I think that's a good way to wrap up. Thanks everyone for following us this morning. Thanks to all 4 of our amazing speakers. You've done a great job. Really interesting, and it seems like even in just an hour we've only scratched the surface of everything that can be done. So let's keep the conversation going. You can download our white paper through the link in the chat, and we Scaleway, we're not stopping here. We're going to keep doing events. We're going to keep publishing content because it's something that we're really committed to. So yeah, let's keep it up. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.